An illegal immigrant who failed an asylum application in Germany was today sentenced to life in prison after trying to kill a man by pushing him onto the tracks on the London Underground. But it isn't actually life in prison, it's a minimum of 8 years. He came to Britain in the back of a lorry and had been sleeping rough in Victoria Station. He tried to kill a postman because he thought that he looked at him the wrong way. Is it far right to get angry about this now? What about Ahmed Alid, who slaughtered an elderly man at random outside an asylum seeker accommodation in Hartlepool? He travelled through 13 other countries before we took him in. Here's the moment he was nicked.
Stay there! Stay there! Oh, please, stay there! Down on the ground! Down! Down on the ground! Down on the ground! No! Down on the ground! Ground! Ground!
What about Abdullah Zidi, who had twice failed his asylum application before converting to Christianity and dousing a woman and a child with acid on the street? He actually did have a Muslim funeral, by the way, for what it's worth. Or Emad Al-Swalmeen, who tried to blow himself up at Liverpool Women's Hospital. He'd had his application rejected but was allowed to stay in Britain for years, certainly long enough to make a bomb. But Badreddin Abdallah Adam Bosch, who's 28, was from Sudan. He stabbed 6 people at a hotel in Glasgow in 2020. He was shot dead by police. Somali Abdul Ibrahim was jailed for 6 years in 2023 for raping a sleeping woman in a Glasgow flat. Algerian Soufiane El-Zaki was jailed for 45 months in 2022 for the attempted rape of a man at an Edinburgh beauty spot. Shahin Darvish Naranjbon from Iran stabbed an 87-year-old woman to death in her own home in North Yorkshire in 2022. She'd allowed him to live with her and referred to him as her grandson. Sudanese Mahmoud Noor Ibrahim was jailed for the disgusting sexual assault of a 16-year-old girl in Hull. Eritrean Phil Montekle raped a woman in Leeds in 2018. He was jailed for more than 6 years. Saddam Mohammadam from Sudan was jailed for 13 years in 2019 for raping a 17-year-old girl in Huddersfield. He lied on his asylum forms, claiming to be a teenager. Somali Risman Natsoka was jailed for 9 years in 2020 after stabbing a woman in the chest when she refused to have sex with him. Then, of course, we've got Lawangin Abdul Ramzai from Afghanistan. He posed as a child before murdering an aspiring Marine in Bournemouth. He was placed in schools with children before being expelled for bringing in a knife. There are dozens more cases like that. This is insane. Obviously, people shouldn't go and burn down migrant hotels or engage in racist vigilante attacks. But I think it is worth noting that for all this talk of the far right that we had during the, riots or disorder or whatever you want to call it, the BBC tracked down a bloke who was apparently responsible for distributing a lot of that far right material online. Well, it turned out, actually, that he was an ethnic minority who lived in Finland. So, not the usual suspect there. And the guy who was arrested for whipping up fake news about the Southport attacker turned out to be a Pakistani man living in Lahore. So, I'll say it again for the avoidance of doubt. There is no place for far-right ideology in Britain, but it is not far right to be very, very angry about the catalogue of disgusting wrong-uns I've just listed there, and to point out that politicians and the media want to demonise you if you speak out about it. Let's get the thoughts from my panel this evening. Daily Telegraph columnist Alison Pearson. We've got Conservative peer Lord Bailey and ex-Labour Party advisor Matthew Larser. Alison, I mean, believe it or not, I could have actually probably filled an hour with the list of people there, but it's absolutely astonishing, isn't it? Are we now far right for getting angry about this?
Well, I think we're far right now if we want a pint of milk, aren't we? I mean, I've got beyond caring now, Patrick. I don't, call us what you like. I mean, the so-called riots after the dreadful Southport killings of those little girls. There's a lot, obviously there was a few bad eggs. There were a lot of people, they know what's happening to their country. They know their communities are full of people that are posing a threat. We know from Migration Watch that the nationalities that are most commonly coming across seeking asylum, Iran, Pakistan, Afghanistan, Iraq, these are most likely to be on the terror watch list. The link is absolutely clear. We can see that 12% of people in British prisons are foreign national offenders. That's gone up 3% from last year. It'll go up next year again. And as a woman, as someone with a daughter in her 20s, as someone who knows lots of people with little girls, I think it's a particular threat to women and girls, the threat of violence against women and girls, and lots of people who work in violence against women and girls are saying that the UK is becoming a less safe space for females.
100% it is. 100% it is. Sean, you know, today's one, which is what prompted me to get quite worked up and do that list, really, is, you know, this individual sentenced to life, only got 8 years, minimum of 8 years anyway, which is not really life, is it? For, well, attempting to murder a man at random at the London Underground. And this bloke was had previous convictions for indecent exposure, had failed an asylum attempt in Germany, but obviously was just sleeping rough indefinitely at Victoria Station. Why do we have to put up with this?
I mean, there's so many places to start. It's firstly, one does have to say, not all illegal immigrants, not even most of them are criminals. That's not their intention at all. But if you're letting this large number of people and you don't check their details because you can't, or they won't let you do that because they get rid of documents, you expose yourself to a huge amount of risk. Alison's point about where most of these young men come from is important because they do not have Western values. So while you're sat at home as a lovely Western liberal, understand you are campaigning for people who do not share your view of the world. It then manifests itself on our street in crimes and attacks on women, etc. But the thing that I would focus on here is this will give community cohesion in this country a real hit. People now will start to look at you with great suspicion because of these few incidences. So it'll be very easy for policymakers to say, well, it's just an odd issue. Yeah, and that might be correct, but its impact is huge. The impact ripples through. And I think that will now really start to affect communities. And I think we need to have a look now, because once the ship has sailed on safety, if people don't feel safe, then two things happen. They either cower or take action. And we wouldn't want to force the British public to the point where it felt like it needed to take action.
No, exactly. And look, you know, I've rattled off a whole different list of crimes there, some of them sex-based, some of them violence, knife crime, all of that stuff. And yeah, look, people in Britain, as in British people, commit these crimes, unfortunately, you know, all the time, right? So it's not just singularly an issue there. I don't really know about anyone particularly trying to blow themselves up in Europe's largest maternity hospital, to be fair. So that's an outlier. But, you know, look, Matthew, why are we having to put up with this in Britain and be told, you know, what, just stay silent about it, really?
Well, I don't think people have been told to stay silent. I think your outrage is utterly understandable. I think we all share it. I mean, this particular crime is, horrific. I mean, anybody who's ever stood on a London Underground platform will just, have that shudder down their spine and just realise quite how grim this is. Look, the problem is as Sean says, the vast majority, even of illegal migrants, even if people who are undocumented, don't want to commit crime. But because we don't know who's here, because we've got a system that's broken, because we're not processing people, because people aren't being sent back after they've had prison sentences, because the system is completely kaput, then we don't know who's here, and we can't decide. We've lost control. And I think, as we know, taking back control generally is what people expect of politics and politicians. So my message to the Labour government was, I don't think Labour's saying people shouldn't worry. I think it's perfectly questionable to say whether Labour's yet got a grip on illegal migration. But it needs to be
I don't agree with you, Matthew, because I think it isn't just Labour, but Keir Starmer, we saw a clip from him there. These people were racist. Not everybody who went out onto the streets after 3 little girls were butchered at a Taylor Swift dance class were racist. They don't want that kind of crime happening to little girls at a holiday club. And we've seen previous administrations, politicians have lost control of this, and their only mechanism is to tell the native population to shut up and not say anything about it.
Alison, he was explicit in his conference speech that it is not racist to be worried about immigration.
Yeah, but he was explicit after he felt the backlash of telling everybody that who were worried about it that were far
he didn't
right.
tell him.
He did. His comment suggested that if you had acted in this way or thought this way, you were far right. And I know this because I live in Romford. It's a white working class area. I have a lot of people to ask, and I asked a fella who I don't know from Adam, and he said to me, "Look, Sean, I've never been racist. I just don't have enough black people in my life to even think about it." But he goes, once Keir Starmer had said that, I had to consider, am I and will I be in the future? because I am worried about these things. And he went on to speak about his children. He's got a teenage boy and he's worried about his safety. And that's the point. I tried to say at the time, Keir Starmer has to be very, very careful about putting wedges in.
I think you do have to be careful.
My point is this, Matthew, that they will keep being able to say things like these are isolated incidents, but they're not that isolated. They're not. And the BBC today, this guy, the tube pusher, right? If you'd have read that BBC article, you'd have had no idea he was a failed asylum seeker who had a history of sex offences, who was in this country illegally, who came in the back of a lorry. So you're not actually really told. These are not that isolated, these incidents.
I think you're right in terms of what you might call the, liberal opinion sometimes likes to ignore these things. I actually ended up... bizarrely was at a poetry reading on Friday with Rupert Everett. Was doing the poetry reading. I didn't realise that it was actually... that the proceeds were going to a group that was basically to sort of naively support everybody who basically arrives on a small boat. I didn't put an extra £5 in the bucket, I can tell you that. So what I mean is I think that's sort of liberal opinions. There is nothing... I mean, we've got them in London, we've got kind of encampments of people in public spaces, not people who are homeless, but people who have arrived, often illegal migrants. And I think that this chap may have been one of those who did the incident on the tube platform. That's got to stop. There is nothing left-wing about having people encamped on the central reservation of Park Lane or anywhere else in the country for that matter, and it's naive of people to say so. On the point about Keir and racism, I just want to think is that anybody who, whatever their motivation, who was standing outside the Holiday Inn in Rotherham when it was being besieged and people were trying to set fire to a building, even if you were just standing there, that is very difficult. It is not racist to be worried about immigration. I've actually been looking for another project this week at other left-wing governments across Europe, like the Danes, who are actually at the key of trying to process people offshore.
But the other left-wing governments are not doing what Keir Starmer is doing. And I want to be very clear.
But he went to meet Giorgia Meloni.
I want to be very clear as well. This Keir Starmer's position, people on the left's position on this started many, many years ago when they undermined the position that the Tory government was in, and then they made a mess of it as well. I really hope that Keir Starmer gets on top of this, but I think he won't be able to because of his support base.
No, go on, final word.
No, well, what we know is 1 in 5 people who comes across in the small boats claims to be a child. OK? We are actually having young males, fit young males, going into secondary schools. This is absolutely mental. Imagine having a child in a class with some strapping 21-year-old, And I think, Matthew, I know what you're saying that Starmer says. I'm not saying it's just Starmer. They're all scared. They've created this huge multicultural problem that they don't know what to do with, and the only thing they can do is threaten and intimidate members of the native population who complain about it.
I'm sick of it. I'm just sick of it. I could have added 20 more names to that list easily. 20 more heinous crimes, and you rack it all up like that. And we shouldn't just be told to keep quiet and shut up about this when you can see it going on with your own eyes. But anyway, right, thank you very, very much for another live